Welcome, everybody, to Before the Commit, episode 7. Wow. This episode, we're going to talk about how to secure LLMs. I'm going to do a little bit of a dive into an open source product called LightLLM. We're also going to touch on an IDE briefly in our kind of continuous journey to find the best one or not use one at all with Warp. And we'll actually wind up blending secure and sus together, since LiteLLM kind of is a lot about what we've been discussing for many weeks now with using things like guardrails. And lastly, we'll hit our news or noise segment. Some interesting news coming out of Anthropic, the largest copyright lawsuit ever, $1.5 billion class action lawsuit against publishers made against them for scraping in published works. As with me usual, I have my friend Dustin Hillgartner. Hey Dustin, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. And we've been talking for a while now about the tools and how many cool tools there are. And one thing that I've been kind of worried about is how accessible these tools are. Like, many years ago, prior to cloud computing, it would be very difficult for you to kind of spin up your own servers in your home and get an IP address and deploy a production application. And then when cloud and SaaS-based services came about, this concept of shadow IT began to become more prevalent, where you could essentially sign up for a variety of cloud services, a project management tool or CRM, and your IT department could know nothing about it. And it might be well intentioned, you're trying to do your job, be more efficient, you're in a team of teams. And what winds up happening with shadow IT is you wind up putting customer data, employee data. These become like systems that are not monitored. They're not connected to single sign-on. People leave the organization. Their user accounts are not deprovisioned. And you wind up having like a sprawl of data that your organization is not necessarily aware of. And there are tools that are out there to deal with it. There's not like a one size fits all, but there are definitely ways. Part of it's education. I mean, education is typically the number one way to deal with security at an organization, because inherently security, the number one way security breaks down is through lack of human attention, lack of human awareness. And then you can add a variety of controls in order to defend against shadow IT. And we're not going to get into those tools today, but there's a lot of different ways to address that. And now we're in this era of shadow AI. How easy is it to go and sign up for a account and start dropping questions or emails or data in there? And again, the same philosophy is in place, where you're just trying to do maybe a good job. It's not malicious. We call this in our industry a spill. It's not a leak, it's a spill. It's not intentional. So, you know, so I think there's two sides of it here. One, yeah, education for sure. But along with the usage of AI is this, I would say that there's a subset of organizations that are fearful over the use of this technology. They don't understand it. When you don't understand something, a natural human response might be to pretend it doesn't exist or to not adopt it. And so by not having a place or a dedicated avenue for the usage of these tools, you inherently kind of create an opportunity for people to go and provision their own tools. So enter LiteLLM. LiteLLM is not a tool to help prevent shadow AI, but it got, kind of we had a discussion last week. We were talking about, could LiteLLM be a tool in your toolbox? Obviously it's not going to solve everything. It's a multi-layered approach, like anything in security. You need in-depth defense. You can't just add an appliance to your rack mount and expect your organization to be secure. So yeah, I'm curious of your thoughts about LightLLM and this kind of technology in general.
Well, I guess I'd take a step back and go back to like shadow IT for a second. And shadow IT is like the idea that folks in your organization are using their own um their own tools, right? And I think if you just boil it down to layman terms, shadow IT is like the idea that you as an employer or you as your company or your project or whatever it is not providing tools that are available to the employees either cheaply or easily for themselves to find, and you're not providing them, so they go and get them themselves because the cost benefit analysis is like, well, I'd rather spend $20 on this AI tool, if my company hasn't provided it to me, because of this huge benefit I get in productivity from it. It'd be kind of like, the equivalent on farm work is like in modern day, right? If you were to go to a farm town and say, hey, go plow my field, and you give them a couple of shovels, one of them is going to come with their tractor from home, and say, hey, I can get this job done a lot better, right? Or someone might contemplate, hey, maybe I can do an arbitrage here and do two fields if I go purchase my own tools. So the point is that if you don't provide your employees with the right tools, they'll go find them themselves if the economics make sense. Um, so I think in AI, you're seeing that a lot because the tools are fairly affordable. You can easily go out and get them. Well, you can use them for free, right? You could just go to ChatGPT and use it right now for free. You can go to google.com and use Gemini right now. Um, there's a number of free avenues. And then even if you go beyond the limits of what they allow you to do for free, or you need a little bit more power, there's like a ladder that has short rungs on it. There's $20 accounts for a lot of these AI tools. So when companies aren't providing them, their employees either already have them, or B, will purchase them if the value of time savings and you know um you know you often think of these tools as just increased productivity, but really
Efficiency.
you're giving your employees time back in their day when you increase their productivity, right? Because they can get more done with less. They can meet their expectations and don't have to work as late or as many overtime hours, et cetera. So it's all, all those things are, two sides of the same coin. Um, so I think what you'll find, and some of these studies are showing, is that it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you were to uh, really study, like do an internal study on how many of your employees are using AI, even though you might have a policy that says don't use AI, or be agnostic about it, you will find that you know I think the study is saying upwards of 40% of folks are admitting to it, right, when asked. So
Hmm.
maybe that number is even higher if you get into the folks that aren't going to admit it. Um, so that's what IT is, and that's what shadow AI is. Um, Now, how light LLM applies to this? Light LLM is kind of, it's like, I guess for lack of a better way to describe it, it's a proxy for your LLM calls. So you can kind of imagine.
What's up? Just to take a step back in case this podcast gets distributed on Instagram and Facebook, and I like to think that we might pique an interest of somebody that knows nothing about technology. They might be listening to it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So just take a step back for a second. What is a proxy?
Um, well, I guess the best way to describe a proxy in layman's terms is it's a way of like, taking all the cords behind your television set and putting them through one channel, right?
Mm.
It's a way of like taking all the traffic that might be emanating out of one location or emanating to a bunch of locations and putting them through a funnel that you might have more control over. So you'll see this, um, in companies who want to guard the traffic in and out of their network. And in the case of this light LLM tool, what really is happening in a shadow AI or shadow IT scenario is that you have all of these peer-to-peer connections going out to all these different AI providers with your data emanating out of those connections, going to those LLM providers. And maybe there's certain amounts of data that you don't care about, but there's potentially data in there like private keys and other types of data that you might not be realizing is going out through those channels. And that's what I've told folks before who say, oh, well, we don't have an AI policy, we're not allowing our employees to use AI. It's like they are using AI. They're using it on their phones, they're using it on their laptops, with their own personal accounts, and your data is flowing out through that channel. And in some cases with these various, and with it just copying and pasting, maybe the losses are limited a little bit because folks are being smart about what they copy and paste a little bit. But when you get to this next layer of like AI tools that really boost productivity into like the stratosphere, where AI tools are making a decision, thinking, and then making another decision, sometimes you're not even aware of what's being put out through your LLM, right? As it's traversing through your code, whatnot, right? It hits a file that you didn't realize was there, and all of a sudden, boom, the contents of that file have gone out through the LLM door. Now, in most cases, you're fine because OpenAI is not sitting there scooping through your data and looking for your keys. But who knows if OpenAI is breached one day and they have that in their logs? Who knows what's going on in these public areas? So, in the federal area, you certainly don't want that data going out to the public OpenAI. You'd want it to go to like the federally FedRAMPed LLM providers like Bedrock and others. So Amazon Bedrock in the GovCloud. So one use case for this in the public sector or in the private sector is saying, okay, employees, you are not allowed to use the public AI providers. You have to use our AI providers, and you can give them the latest and the best models in those ecosystems, right? But you're declaring that this is where the channel that everyone needs to go through, right? And that's where LightLLM comes in play. You can kind of block all the public channels and give everyone like a ChatGPT URL that they can use that channels all their LLM calls through this LiteLLM proxy. And then you'll get a variety of things through that. You can guard your API key with OpenAI and issue virtual keys to all your employees. So instead of sharing your one API key for your corporation with these variety of different AI providers, you can basically like a router, you can distribute little tokens that allow everyone to use that API key without knowing the API key, and you can shut them down individually as a team. And that also gives you tracking over how much each employee is spending using AI, what kind of messages they're sending, any errors they're getting, so you can see when things aren't working properly for them, and you can have your operations folks take a look and fix their workstation. You can see the folks that are getting the most out of AI and the folks that maybe need a little bit of training to get more. And you can also put guardrails in place so that if a whole bunch of like WAF kind of like heuristics where and algorithms that you can go through the data quickly before it goes out, so that question that they're asking and they've copy and pasted some code in there or is automatically being sent with a coding agent, you can quickly assess that there's maybe some data in there that you don't want to go out and smack it down before it goes out. So it blocks it before it goes out. And also, likewise, on the way in, maybe there's something you want to come into your network from an LLM. If it was nefarious or some way, you can block those. Um, so that kind of gives you visibility into the usage, gives you cost metrics about per employee, per team, all kinds of tagging, gives you virtual keys that allow you to you know do access and RBAC and all that kind of stuff. You have guardrails about what goes out and what comes into the LLMs from the LLMs. And you have integration with a variety of monitoring and observability tools. So you can get like all your logs to be piped into a variety of different places. And then it's open source. And I think the way that the company that works on LightLLM makes money is they have an enterprise version of it that has additional tools like SSO and those types of things. But then you'd have to go into their ecosystem in the closed source. And that's LiteLLM in a nutshell. Also, rate limiting budgets and things like that, so you can apply budgets to certain employees or certain teams and rate limit them. Oh, and the last thing I should mention is load balancing and fallbacks. So if you wanted to load balance LLM calls across a bunch of different providers so that you don't hit their rate limits with each individual one, or if you hit a rate limit with one of them and you don't want to just shut down your employees, maybe it falls back to another model. Those types of things are possible with it as well.
So what about MCP servers? Can you kind of govern the usage of specific MCPs?
Yes. You can govern the usage of MCP servers and a whole variety of kind of like RBAC with it, so that you could say certain teams have certain MCP servers. Also, models can have like RBAC to them. So you could say like, my support team has certain models and certain RAG, so certain like company data that they can that their models have available to them, so vector stores. And then maybe your data science team has more powerful models and other types of data, maybe more tactical data. So yeah, it has those types
So
of
how
capabilities
does
too.
the RBAC work? Like, have you messed around with it at all? Like, can you kind of give like a little bit more about how that actually works?
Um, well, I haven't gotten too deep into it, but what I have surmised is that there's a number of different ways that you can deploy this thing, and it will integrate with some of the secret stores behind the scenes, so in AWS or Azure, and it'll actually issue and store keys. So when you add a new user, what you're doing is you're issuing your own key for them. So you're never handing out your OpenAI key for your company to any of your employees. It stays locked
Mm,
away. Um, and what LightLLM is doing when you create an account for one of your employees that they need to use OpenAI is you're issuing them like a LightLLM created key that's in your secret store, and all of the RBAC and authentication is based around that user with that key.
I see.
Now, I'm not sure if that gets precisely like at what RBAC rules they have in permissioning. I didn't get too deep into that, but I know you'd messed around with it, so I'm not sure if you had any details about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to like restricting which models you can have access to and then creating policies that have maybe different guardrails or different limitations or
Yeah,
different budgets, and so on and so forth.
yeah. All that stuff is possible with that.
Yeah, so
So it's
like
a
I was also, yeah, go ahead.
so I was just going to sum up by saying it's a pretty useful tool. I mean, if you're an organization out there and you're stuck, I know in the last podcast we had mentioned kind of three types of companies or organizations out there. They're the ones that are trying to get ahead and saying, we're embracing AI, we are an AI company, um, you know, uh, trying to get ahead of the curve. There's folks that are sort of in research and learning and education mode and trying to figure out how they can apply this to their business, but they haven't done anything yet. Um, And then there's folks that are, just head in the sand and saying this isn't happening, and trying to pretend like it's not happening at all. Um, I think that if you're a company that's trying to embrace AI and trying to have a policy internally for how your folks can use AI because you want to get ahead of the curve, you want to be able to measure the leakage if there's any happening. So you want to be able to see what kind of leaks are coming out of your network, and then now that you've seen the leaks, you can build tools that block them before they go out.
Hmm.
Um, then you're going to want to use a tool kind of like LiteLLM in order to get a handle. You're going to want to provide the LLM AI tools to your employees, the ones they need in order to increase their productivity, so that they don't go outside and start using their own personal accounts. Trust me, the moment you give them an open AI account, they're not going to buy a personal account now. They're going to use the one that the company bought for them, right? So now you have full control over what's being leaked. And now you have visibility into how people are leveraging AI, who's getting the most out of it, you know, and you can start to get ahead of the curve and build even further productivity increases on top of that.
So what would you say to, yeah, I mean, it seems to me like you need to do this. Like you need to have a policy around responsible usage of AI, because if you don't, like, you know, you wind up in a scenario of like BYOM, like bring your own model or bring your own AI, where people are you going to use the tools like you said to make their job easier, or and then
Yeah.
you know you're not in tune to like what's going on, you're not aware, and the what if you're a company or an organization that is responsible for HIPAA data, or you're an organization that has intellectual property, and yeah,
Yeah.
maybe OpenAI is not scraping their logs for that sort of thing, but um when you create a culture of bringing your own model, like, what if you accidentally typo OpenAI, like, or ChatGPT, like a typo squatted domain,
Yeah.
and you now copy and paste that into some random field that is submitting data to another location? Like, it just creates this like opportunity where you said don't use these things because for whatever reason, and yeah, so like adopting a policy about responsible usage, like don't ban, like encourage, and then create like that portal like you mentioned, or the toolbox for them to use, like these are the safe models to use.
Yeah. I mean, there has to be an understanding that, like, you know, there's certain market forces that you can't entirely control, right? Just like if you were to tell your employees that they can't use their cell phone during work, it's a losing battle, right? They're
Mhm.
going to take a phone call, they're going to text, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
they're just going to sit in the bathroom stall for the rest of the day and
yeah,
text
there's a
and
certain
not work.
balance. And if you're in an industry where that's a problem, right? Where when they're keeping track of their clients on their phone, et cetera, you issue them a company phone, right?
Hmm.
Um, you don't fight that by saying, "Oh no, we're just going to become more draconian," because there's certain things that are ubiquitous in society. There's certain things, tools that are expected to be at the workstation, and I think that as AI becomes that acceptable tool, the folks that are sitting there and saying no AI, no AI, are going to start to look more like they're creating a little bit of a hazard. Like, obviously there's people using AI, and saying no AI is just a way of pushing it down underneath the carpet that AI is being used, and you have no control over it. You don't see what's being leaked out, etc. So there's a point where it starts to become a moral hazard. Um,
Mm.
so I think that to get ahead of that, you're going to absolutely need to have, like, the bring your own device version of AI. You're gonna either have safe guardrails around it, or you're gonna have a company provided AI. You're gonna have to have policies around this that guard the usage of AI. Otherwise, there's no right of first refusal that you have at the last mile to say no, that data can't go out. Right? It's
Yeah.
just going to go out through another channel.
Yeah, so yesterday I was on LinkedIn and I saw the CEO of Security Scorecard, Alex Yampolsky, who we know very well, reposted or posted a screenshot of a new job title that is appearing across LinkedIn. And
I saw
it's
that. Yeah.
the vibe coder cleanup specialist.
Yeah.
And his remark was like, wow, this is like kind of a thing now, like a career. And I commented on it and I said something along the lines of like, you know, AI coding is perhaps the biggest data breach of all time. Like because people who might be using AI coding tools are probably not using a company. Like, I would venture to say, I have no data to back this up, that a majority or a significant majority of companies in the world, engineers are using AI coding tools, and the companies themselves have no way to actually know what tools are being used and what data is being sent. And if code is your intellectual property, forget about code. The topic was on vibe coding, but imagine it is like the single most, it is not even like a backdoor. It is, I am willingly giving data away to an organization without my company have any knowledge of where that data is going. It's not going out via email. It's not going out via a shared collaboration suite. Um, it is literally somebody copying and pasting it into a web browser and clicking submit.
And that's what I was trying to say about the moral hazard of this. Like in the beginning, it's fine, shock, AI exists. What do we do? We're in this period where nobody quite knows what to do. The period that we're coming out of. Now, people kind of know what to do, but you're starting to get to the period where companies don't mind this period where they don't have to do it. There's no cost of increased security, et cetera, associated with this productivity. We're getting all the productivity gains. Our employees are using AI. We don't have to acknowledge it, right? All of a sudden, these pitch books and these spreadsheets and these PowerPoint slides, we're pitching twice as many people as normal. We don't know why. We don't know why. But we're not gonna acknowledge that people are using AI. We're just gonna say they can't use AI. But wink, wink. We know you're using AI. And then when a breach happens, they're going to say, "Oh, we had no idea, and we'll do better next time." But at some point, when enough time goes by, it becomes a moral hazard where people start to say, "Well, why didn't you do this? You should have known about it already. Look at all the news," right? So if you want to get ahead of that, you're going to have to start thinking about things like proxies for the LLMs and bringing an LLM into your environment, giving an avenue for employees to use this technology in a safe way. And I'm not saying you have to use LightLLM. That's one open source project, but you're going to need to put the safeguards and the guardrails around this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there are folks out there who know how to do this. That this is not something that you can just have your head in the sand and pretend like there's nothing out there to do it. So yeah, we do see organizations that are doing that. And they're not going to be able to do that forever without some sort of cost to it, whether it be through a breach or through
Yeah,
Yeah.
one thing that I just started thinking about was the, you know, we work in, government defense contracting, like as a day job. And,
Hmm.
you know, the way that the government um, solicits for organizations, contractors to take on work is they have to, according to like the law, because it's taxpayer dollars, have to publicly post those solicitations. And there's exceptions to the rule. They have to be posted on sam.gov. And
Hmm.
so the traditional way that organizations have kind of worked toward winning a contract was a variety of mechanisms, shaping, which is, finding what the customer's requirements are, and, getting them to write a solicitation that's as close as possible to what you're offering. Um, but also sometimes they're not that case. They're not shaped toward anyone in particular. They could be a contract vehicle that's onboarding a series of potential suitors that could then later build on a specific task order, something of that nature. And what AI has done is it has lowered the quality of what is considered acceptable. It's become homogenized to the point where it's hard for the government to actually understand the difference between what somebody is actually capable of doing, and AI just writes the responses. Like, the technology is so amazing now that, like, you can spit out a 10-page white paper in a matter of minutes
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's essentially a homework assignment that doesn't actually lend itself to somebody knowing whether or not you're capable of doing what you're doing. There's very little human interaction.
Yeah.
And I read something somewhere, I don't remember where it was, but it said that the government is about needs to enter a phase of, and I say government, the US government needs to enter a phase in which they start looking at human beings and looking at what they're capable of doing, getting people in front of a, like, now more than ever, you can no longer hide behind technology when it comes to producing quality. Like, there needs to be more than ever a human component to delivery of some of these capabilities, or delivery of a solution, or a platform, or because at the end of the day there needs to be people behind what is being delivered. And even if it's AI as the end result, there still needs to be people behind it that are capable and responsible and have a real reputation of past performance of having done this before.
Yeah, it's a complicated question. I mean, I most of my career has been in the private sector, so I always try to apply how I think about how government contracting should be done from that perspective. I've always thought that there's just like it seems like there's just inherent waste with government contracting. I always have thought that I would prefer if the government were acquiring software more like the private sector, right? The private
I mean, they're
sector
trying
doesn't get.
to they're trying to do that, but the problem with that is that it's hard to tell the largest organization in the world, in the US, maybe the
Mhm.
world, that you should all do things this way, and then immediately train everybody on how to actually acquire software that way. And also
Yeah.
whatever existing things that you have. Like, yeah, so they're trying to
And I
do
don't
that.
necessarily think it means it has to mimic the private sector. But I
Yeah.
think that the essential piece is that the government has to have less skin in the game, like less risk, right? Like the private sector, when it buys software, it's got little risk, right? Like when you get Netflix, right? If you don't like it, you just cancel next month, right? Um, there's always like that free trial, try it out, the demo, it already exists, or if you're in an early stage startup, like there's this reoccurring, like, maybe you're an early beta customer, like you're expected to pay one time, but you're early on in development, you're getting you're essentially free usage in the beginning,
hmm
right? If
hmm
you're a big enough company in a beta or something like that.
hmm
So, but the government doesn't get any of that. The government pays for something to be built, and then that thing fails most of the time, as do
Not
any
always, not always, but yeah, yeah, for sure.
as as do most software projects. It's not that the government. It's not that software projects are. It's not that like people are necessarily um, failing on purpose. Software projects fail, right? Not every new venture, not every new idea you have, not every bespoke thing that you come up with is going to be a success. And I think that there's a lot of things that are being built that are bespoke, and maybe some of them don't need to be bespoke. They could be more of a platform or more of something that can be used across different areas of the government, and therefore the government wouldn't be on the hook of all these projects that are bespoke little projects that succeed and fail, and the government's paying for them regardless of whether they do or not. um,
Well, there can be other things like bake-offs, like, don't select one company, select five, give them and the government does do this occasionally. They use like what are called other transaction authorities, which are like pre-negotiated contracts that allow for prototyping for
mhm,
non-traditional defense companies. So somebody that's not a large vendor can go and put out, this thing, build something based off of some existing technology, or, adapt a technology to a specific use case. And then 30 days later, 90 days later, the government will evaluate those things. And then based off of the success of that prototype, an award can be associated. Or they may use a marketplace like Platform One
mhm.
or Tradewinds or something like that to quickly acquire technology through a living, breathing video, like a demonstration, an oral presentation. So yeah, there are ways that the government is trying to do this, but it's not as widespread as we would think it is.
In a perfect world, right, a software company would be able to approach the government market in the same way the private sector market do. They could talk to the variety of folks in the positions that they're targeting. They could say, what are your problems? They could give them some sort of like champion type relationship where they could say, here's our software and try it out amongst your team. You know, now the reasons why that can't happen as fluidly as that is there's a whole bunch of security and sensitive controls for good reasons, right? It's the
hmm
government and military. There's a lot of people trying to attack it. So in
hmm
an ideal world, you could have your cake and eat it too. There would be the security protections that you need, but still that fluidity in terms of like those conversations and that product market fit and that and all that early stage activity that you need in order to to build a platform that applies to multiple branches at once, as opposed to just responding to an RFI for a particular leaf of a particular tree. And there's really very little opportunity for that thing to apply to the whole tree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's becoming more important because of the fact, going back to the original point of the ability to write a response to a government solicitation is not a challenge and is not a significant barrier. And honestly, it's the whole concept of like being able to monitor like sam.gov for those solicitations that match your skill set and then automatically respond is not trivial. I mean, it's non-trivial, or it is trivial, sorry. It's trivial, and there's companies out there that do that for you. So like you could have never sold anything and want to sell into something, and essentially, you know, be just flooding the market with responses. The government may not be able to even read that many solicitations and just look for ways to see that you're in non-compliance, meaning you didn't use the right font or you didn't touch on this point, and just look
Mhm.
to eliminate you as quickly as possible, or may just, be picking somebody based off of like whatever. Anyway, so I know also you messed around with Warp a little bit.
Yeah, I did. And I feel like I need to mess around with it a little bit more to really truly give it justice. Um, but I've gotten the gist of it. Um, so the one thing that's interesting about Warp that is, I guess, different than all the other IDEs, if you can call them coding IDEs. Um, it's similar to Claude Code. It seems like it's trying to set itself up as a competitor. It speaks about Claude Code a number of times in its marketing. So it looks like it's trying to be like an alternative to Claude Code. So it's much more in the CLI perspective. But what's interesting about it, unlike Claude Code is purely a CLI, right? Like it is entirely a CLI. It lives in your terminal, and you end up using it inside of VS Code or Cursor via the terminal, right? And then when you think of VS Code and Cursor and all these other derivatives, they're a coding IDE, and then the terminal is like an add-on, right? It's like this slide up panel that comes from the bottom. So it's the whole visual aspect is code centric, and then the terminal is like, oh yeah, you need that. Here it is. And Claude lives in that terminal. Warp is, and like I said, I haven't gone down the deep rabbit hole that is Warp. There's a lot there. But from what I can surmise, having used it for about a little bit less than a week, it's a terminal first, right? So it's like the application. So it's like you're getting iTerm, right? It's like its own application. And it's a big terminal window, whatever size you want to make it, I guess. And it's like this AI terminal window, right? So you got all the autocomplete you'd expect with a terminal window that had a lot of advanced features, but now you've got the ability to just prompt, right? Instead of writing, CD to change my directory, I could just write there, change my directory to this, and it would do it. So it like seamlessly goes between terminal and prompt, which is kind of cool. Crazy IntelliSense in terms of what you can do with it. So, it unlocks all the things that you would have with Cursor or with Claude Code, but you would just ask Cursor or Claude Code to do it. So it's like all the bash tools are available to you because you're in a CLI. So Warp will be able to like go look through your Git history and tell you about all the changes that have happened recently. It can go look at your Sentry logs. It can go, muck around in your Kubernetes cluster. It can do anything that you can do through Bash because it's a terminal window. But so can Cursor, and so can Claude Code. So it's not necessarily a unique ability, but it's fully capable of doing all those things. Now, like I said, it's a terminal window first, right? Then when you're doing coding, it's like the terminal window gets side panels that are the coding stuff. So that's like, it's like the polar opposite of Visual Studio Code in that sense, that Visual Studio Code is like the coding window, and then the terminal window is like the add-on. In Warp, it's almost like the terminal window is the focus, and then the coding aspect is the add-on. I coded with it a little bit. It seemed, up to par with most of the other coding IDEs. It has rules. It has, all the things you'd expect to see out of most of the modern coding things, coding IDEs. But the thing that threw me is that it's terminal first, and code seems like the add-on. And I'm mostly only using the terminal when it's in the context of a coding project I'm on. Also, the thing that kind of threw me was like, Warp is like your whole computer is your scope. So there's certainly things with Warp that seem more natural to it, like summing up like your whole folder structure of your hard drive, right? Or um, comparing two coding projects to each other, right?
Mm,
You wouldn't do that type of stuff with Cursor or Claude because most of the time you're in the context of a single coding project.
mm,
You're not in the context of your whole hard drive. Now you could, right? You could break down the rules that are in those projects and open their scope up, but Warp just has that scope all the time,
mm,
which is powerful, but also maybe a little bit unnerving. Like what
mm,
stuff on my hard drive is being sent there?
mm,
Um,
mm,
which, by the way, is still a problem, which we were talking about in the previous segment with the
mhm.
coding tools. But at least
Yep.
with the coding tools, you're limited to a folder, right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Hopefully.
although they do break out of that occasionally.
Yeah.
But Warp is just like there is no context, right? Everything is its context, which, like I said, is powerful, but also it's set up like a library of like workflows and prompts, right? And then you could just like click on that prompt and run it now.
Mm.
So that's kind of cool. So it becomes like the ultimate AI make file for your computer, right? Um,
It's
uh,
interesting because I saw this quote. I don't think it's a new quote, but it was from the CEO of NVIDIA.
mhm.
And his quote is that English is the new coding language.
Mm. That is, I've thought about that before, and
Mhm.
you're talking about in the other segment where you said, "Do you think we're going to move away from coding languages to binary?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, when humanity doesn't matter anymore, then it'll just write binary, right? Because it'll be like when the AI is like,
Well, the question is at what point do you need to see the code? And that's when the AI fails, or you need to fine tune something because the AI is not good enough yet. And that is a very
I
broad statement on purpose.
I think
But
failure is only one facet, right?
okay.
Needing to have a coding language, which I do believe will devolve into just English, right? Or whatever written language. I think that coding languages will kind of like just be subsumed into written language to some extent because eventually you'll just be concisely telling the computer what you want to do. But I think the coding language, the language that gets built into whatever the binary is, exists for a long time. And I think it has more to do with just than fixing errors. It has to do with compliance. It has to do with like trust. It has to do with um, the the ultimate user needs to have some level of understanding of how the product works in order to trust it in some high risk situations. Um,
Possibly, but I could also argue that you could the that is a means to an end, right? With proper dynamic code analysis, because static code analysis or looking at supply chain risk is as a result of not being able or a limitation of effective dynamic code test cases. So if you have, and also those tools don't necessarily catch 0 days. So like when you talk about real security, like in-depth defense, like static code analysis, looking at code, looking at supply chain risk or software bill of materials is really not security. It is one mechanism that you use to vet risk. So in the absence of those things, you would do those other things. You would do dynamic code analysis, you would do fuzzing, you would do, SQL injection, you would do more integration testing, you'd have more perimeter based defenses, acknowledging that those things are going to fail anyway. And you need, like, again, like WAFs and other, network intrusion detection, host based intrusion detection, so on and so forth.
yeah, I feel like we're a whole.
We're ways away from it, but
I feel like that industry, the
mhm.
right side of the equation, like the the I know this car is aerodynamic not because I developed it with laser precision, but the other side, like I have a test that's
A
so
wind tunnel.
thorough. Yeah, I have a wind tunnel test that's so thorough that the only way the AI could create was one that was aerodynamic,
Yeah.
right?
What you care about as a customer is the end result.
That
And from a
that
security perspective, in the wild, that's what you care about. You don't care about the source code. Like, who cares? If there's no source code, why even care? Why, yeah. You want to look
but
at memory leaks. Yeah.
I'm saying
Mhm.
that side of the equation is not mature right now. Like I feel like that
Sure.
industry is going to become mature over the next 10
And, and
years
and
or so.
sometimes it's more expensive to do it that way, right? But if you
Mhm.
reduce costs on the engineering side, then you free up energies and monies because it requires more compute, it requires more capital, more infrastructure. So inherently, people have subsidized the risk vetting with, looking at source code, for example, like doing static code analysis, looking for outdated libraries, or looking for libraries that may be malicious, that have backdoors.
Mhm. No, I agree. I agree that once you get the right side of the equation to the point where it's mature enough, then the left side of the equation, the source code does not matter as much. But I think in the interim period, which I think is going to be a long time,
Mm.
as that market matures,
Mhm.
you know, AI is like a Play-Doh machine at the speed of light, you know. It's like if you don't have the right guardrails up, you're not going to get the shape out and the beauty, the beautiful star you're trying to get at a Play-Doh. You're going to get um, just a whole bunch of craziness all over the place coming out. That might be a
Yeah.
little bit. You ever had one of those Play-Doh machines that you have little
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
shapes?
For the analogy. I was trying to. You were talking about stars, and I was thinking about Play-Doh, not Play-Doh. So I was like,
Oh,
connect.
philosopher.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, thank you for yeah, the machine, the Play-Doh machine, Play-Doh, not
Yeah. Right.
Play-Doh.
So
So
you
yeah,
were just agreeing with me.
let's wrap it up with news or noise. We're not going to get a chance to cover all the things, but I did want to touch on this lawsuit, this class action lawsuit that Anthropic is being agreed to pay $1.5 billion.
Mm,
So I'll summarize it. So like large language models uh, train on human written text. There's a bunch of pirated sites out there that take copyrighted works, books, and make it available for free. I guess they strip the DRM out of it or somehow, you know, copy paste off of, Kindle or something like that. I'm sure it's not too difficult to do it, but it's against the law. And somehow, some way, Anthropic was found to have been training on these works. And
mm,
so the class action lawsuit will pay out, um, you know, various ranges of money um, that were included in the 500,000 works that were found to have been infringed upon. And I assume that other companies will have been found also. There's blood in the water right now. So, these publishers are probably looking to all of these LLMs like OpenAI and, Grok and whatever to see if they also trained on these models. We've talked a bunch about using creative works to train upon and some of the things that are coming around. So, yeah, what do you think? What's your thoughts about this?
when I saw that article, the first thing I thought was Reddit included in that because I heard that there was something with Reddit as well, but I didn't see anything mentioned with that. So I wonder if that was a hallucination of my brain that they're somehow involved in. Because I thought Reddit was upset at Anthropic as well, um, about the same thing. Like they had gone through their logs and found that a company, I believe it was Anthropic, I might be misquoting, had gone through and scooped up all their data. Um, but yeah, I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be, the thing, right? I think that all the anyone who can prove that their stuff was scooped up by these companies is going to uh, look for payment for that. And I think
Ways to
that,
recoup costs.
yeah, and it makes perfect sense because now those companies are huge, so they can afford to pay a lot of money. You know.
Yeah, Reddit did sue Anthropic, but that was back in June. It was a separate lawsuit, not
Okay.
related
Okay.
to this. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I think that it makes sense. And I think that my opinion about it is that I think that's what the court system is for, is to figure out that, because I don't every single one of them is probably an individual case. Now, the principle about whether or not you should have to pay the source of the data is an interesting question. I think that if there's clearly a sign on the door that says you must pay for this data, then I think, and you go grab it, then that's stealing. Um, but it's an open question about whether it's publicly available, right? Like if I go to the public library and read a book and learn how to build a software company out of it, I don't owe the library, or a private library, I don't owe the private library any more than my membership. But if I go into the library and like scan every single book in a millisecond with some sort of new technology, and then train a whole genius off of it, like, it's an open question about, like, you know, certainly in the future, I think there will be a sign on the door that makes it more clear about what it costs to do that, right? And I think there should be, right? I
Well, I
think
think
the
it has to do
library,
with what's acceptable use. So like if you buy a
yeah,
book and you're using it for yourself and it's in your brain, you're using
mm,
it for your own, you might write yourself or use it for inspiration. I would say that's fair use. But if a model is training on copyrighted works and then now it's being made available in the database. Now, you know, we don't know exactly how each LLM company uses this data. Like, is it more than just a large language model? Like, if you start asking it to quote lines of an entire book, like, could it actually give you like an entire snippet? And is that acceptable use of it? And did you ask permission for it? And what's the licensing of it? Because once you've ingested that data, it's now in the hands of this other organization. So yeah, I mean, you could essentially write a brand new book in the style of another book and then sell it.
yeah,
Now, a human being probably can't do that. Is probably not capable of doing that. Unless you're some kind of savant, you're not going to be able to read all the Game of Thrones books and then write another Game of Thrones book. But AI could do that. And that just brings up so many different types of questions that I don't think copyright law has contemplated yet. So I think it's transforming. There's a transformative thing that is, I think, the undercurrent here that or may need to happen.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you. Um, it's a difficult topic that I'm not sure if I know,
Yeah, I
like,
don't know enough about
how
copyright
would
law.
you copyright like a style? You know what I mean? Like, at what point does it become like, the flip side of the coin is bad too, when copyrights just bash down innovation everywhere, because like, I wrote the first wizard book, so I own wizards now. You know what I mean? Like, at some point, like, the walls, and then it blurs the lines of AI. Like, I always think about, like, when I think of a law, does it stand the test of time? Does it stand even a period of time, or does it obviously get to the absurd at the edges, right? And it's hard to draw like a dividing line, like a principled approach to that, like where it doesn't blur very easily, and it's hard to determine what side of the line you're on. And I have a hard time drawing the line, copyright makes sense because it's essentially you're copying something, verbatim, and then when it comes to songs, there's a certain amount of notes in a row or something like that. They have it down to like an easily measurable line. But like, how do you measure the line with some of these things? Like you're saying, some of it is repeatable if you just have a savant. The only thing that's different is that now we have a savant all over the place with this stuff. So, if it wasn't illegal for the one person, why does it suddenly become illegal?
Well,
when
it
you have
has
a
to
lot
do
of
with
it?
frequency. Like,
Yeah.
a copyright is only as good as your ability to defend against it. So like if your works are being found to have been, plagiarized or, posted for free somewhere, you have a responsibility to go and, file cease and desist, because if you don't utilize your copyright, you lose your copyright. The
Yeah.
frequency of a savant trying to replicate your work is highly unlikely. And would a savant choose to do that? Maybe. It's easy to go and file a cease and desist against a single savant. But when you have this ability to proliferate in a manner which you've never seen before, I think it brings up questions about the evolution of these copyright laws and like, do they really stand the test of time? And I think it's my dad made a joke earlier because I was reading him this story this morning during breakfast, and he said the only original thing that a comedian said an only original thing that a human being has ever said is like when the doctor like hits you and you start crying.
Yeah. that's probably very true, right? Because everything is just a derivative of some learning or something like that, which is kind of like where my thought is. Now, I get what you're saying, the frequency and the extreme, and I think that's where it's just beyond, you need to have some sort of really deep thought about it, and some scholars and folks really think about it for a prolonged period of time and use case study and history to figure out where it lands in a principled approach. But yeah, it's a tough question. I think that a lot of these things, on the individual level, they don't work themselves out like an individual author, but on the aggregate level, they work themselves out to some extent, because the folks are going to get some sort of payment back. Like I'm sure that Reddit would never be able to get a price tag for their data before it was taken by an AI company. But now that the AI company has made a bunch of money, now they can get this money. So it's, in a way, it kind of works out for them. Do you think that's the case or not really? Do you think they were better off before it was taken?
Well, I think the question comes down to like, what if I want to scrape your works? Can I license it?
Yeah.
So I think it brings up an interesting business model, because I think publishers and various organizations are going to realize that if they don't monetize it, if they don't create a way, that they're not going to be able to control it. And so I think, similar to how Napster, like with audio files, like you had to declare bankruptcy on the fact that you're not going to be able to prevent the proliferation of MP3 files. So we'll set up our own MP3 servers.
Exactly.
And we'll monetize it this way. And we're not going to be able to sell CDs anymore and tapes and make $15 or $20 an album. We're not going to be able to sell books anymore, so maybe not as many books, and we'll have to create a new business model. So I think that's probably the next evolution of movies, music, written works, is that publishers will have to figure out how to monetize it. Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining. We didn't get to some of the other things. Real quick, they're reconstructing an Orson Welles movie from the 1940s. Missing footage that was deleted. It wasn't his choice, but he gave up rights to the final cut. And they're using old photography and radio shows to reconstruct a 40-minute slice of an Orson Welles movie that was lost. They actually burned the negatives of the movie. And so very interesting stuff with AI in movies. We'll touch on it next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about next. We'll, of course, cover something cool in our usual segment on Tool of the Week and whatever's going on in the news with News or Noise. Once again, thanks for joining Before the Commit. We'll see you all soon.